So today, I want to provide you with an introduction to human layer security and how Tessian is leveraging human layer security to secure email data. Okay, so firstly I'll define for you what human layer security is. And it's concerned with preventing data breaches and data loss that's caused by people or your organization's employees. And it turns out that the vast majority of these instances of data loss are caused by people because people make mistakes, and that for a long time has been an extremely large contributor to the overall number of breaches. People break the rules and compromise security for convenience, and people also get tricked into giving up information or money, as is the case in a successful phishing attack, for instance. And so that's what we're concerned with stopping. Human layer security is targeting those particular threat vectors, stopping data breaches caused by people, and that's what the human layer is. If we can secure that, we can stop those breaches. And it's email where people are most vulnerable, since that's the main artery of communication into an organization. And it's still the case today, and it has been the case that that's also the business application, certainly from a communications perspective, that employees spend the most time on. Now that is shifting slightly with the increased adoption of Teams and other collaboration and messaging apps like Slack, for instance, and we're adapting to that. I'll discuss how we're adapting to that as we go on. But certainly email is still the single point of kind of entry, and not the single point, but the largest point of entry into an organization and where those communications are taking place. So in terms of an approach to securing the human layer on email and protecting your data on email, there are three things to consider. First of all is preventing those threats that are caused by people, of course. Secondly, gaining visibility into your human layer risks and actually having a way of quantifying that. It's very difficult for organizations at the moment to try and quantify how many emails are misdirected, how many attachments are incorrectly sent to the wrong people, how the insider threat, how much data is being exfiltrated. It's almost impossible for most businesses to gain a foothold and visibility on that. And then thirdly, and perhaps this is the most important one, it's something that I think all our speakers have mentioned to varying extents in their presentations today already, is changing behavior. And we do that with contextual warnings and testing. But that's really the path to kind of sustain a sustained improvement in security, is educating users and raising the profile of security awareness of the organization. So Tessian's human layer security platform is stopping these data breaches that are caused by employees, and we're targeting those three pillars. And the first thing we're doing to prevent those threats, and this is probably the thing that really differentiates Tessian in the market, is that we're leveraging machine learning to automatically prevent threats, including accidental data loss, intentional data exfiltration, and also spear phishing attacks as well. And I'll talk more about those threats on the next slide. We also provide visibility into those human layer risks, and we provide employees with in-the-moment training, courtesy of our contextual warnings, which we show them, which serve to drive them towards more secure email behavior. And it's those three in combination that serve to improve a customer's security posture. And I should add as well, if anyone has any questions as I go through, please jump in. There'll also be a chance at the end, of course. Okay, so Tessian has three products within the platform, two that are focused on outbound email data loss prevention, and another which is focused on preventing customers from inbound email attacks. Tessian Guardian is the first of the outbound modules. That's used for accidental data loss and preventing employees from misdirecting emails and misattaching files. So people sending emails accidentally to the wrong people or attaching the wrong files and sending those accidentally. Enforcer is used for data exfiltration. So whereas Guardian is preventing people from making mistakes inadvertently. Enforce is used for preventing employees from intentionally sending emails containing sensitive business information to unauthorized or personal accounts. In most instances, it's more careless or negligent. Employees are sending sensitive information, not realizing it's a non-compliant email that breaks the company's policy, to a personal account, for instance, or to another account they shouldn't be, and breaking that company policy and risking their business. We also, of course, cover more malicious instances whereby an employee is intentionally sending data somewhere outside the organization because they want to take it to their next business, or they want to steal the IP or what have you. So we're stopping the full range of threats there. And Tessian Defender is used for spear phishing, business email compromise, and other impersonation attacks. Account takeover is included there as well. I think business email compromise, spear phishing was also mentioned, I think perhaps in David's session this morning. So we'll talk about that as well, and how Tessian acts as an additional layer of protection on top of a customer's existing defenses, whether that's a Mimecast or a Proofpoint or another secure email gateway, or on top of an email platform like Office 365 or Google, for instance. We're solving threats that need a new approach to slightly more sophisticated attacks, and we'll talk about what those are. And we have this intelligence module as well. You can see here on the right-hand side, this is where the insights come in. This provides kind of view of all of the human layer threats as they pertain to email across the organization. And before I discuss those products in a bit more detail, to give you a high-level overview of how Tessian works, as I mentioned earlier, we're using machine learning to automatically prevent these threats that I mentioned. And to do that, when you deploy Tessian at your organization, we ingest up to the past 12 months of historical email data. So we're looking back to process that data, and we've developed our algorithms. We were founded in 2013, and we've only been in the market selling Tessian for the past 4 years or so. So for the first 4 years, the first half of our existence, we were collecting data and training our algorithms on that data. And this is where Tessian differentiates. You'll hear a lot of companies talking about machine learning. It's almost become a buzzword, a tick box for a lot of technology vendors. We really are a machine learning company. We've got over 200 people who are just focused on leveraging machine learning to stop these human layer threats. And it's the maturity of those models and algorithms and the efficacy of the solution, their ability to spot real threats with a low false positive rate, that really differentiates Tessian. And so what our algorithms are really good at doing is being able to collect that data and analyze it to get a really deep understanding of normal behavior at your organization as it relates to email. So we learn and understand all of the email relationships within a company's network. So we're analyzing for every individual who they're emailing, who's emailing them, what was discussed, when, from which locations, what times, what was the language used, and so on and so forth. By getting that understanding of normal, we can detect when there are anomalies, whether that's because the wrong recipient's on the email, or whether that's because one of your vendor's domains is being impersonated, or one of your partner's accounts has been compromised and they're emailing you. So by understanding that normal, we can detect anomalies, compromise, impersonations, and so on. Okay, so this is the first product, Guardian, which is used for accidental data loss, as I mentioned a few moments ago. And this is a challenge that it's a strange challenge because it's the #1 reported incident to the ICO in the UK. I think all of the organizations that we speak with, particularly those in highly regulated industries like legal services, other professional services, financial services, they know this is a real risk for their business. And most people have experiences, I'm sure, where you've sent an email to the wrong person. or you sent the wrong file to people, and it's a horrible kind of sinking feeling. And yet, although it's the number one reported incident, we know it goes hugely underreported as well, because people often don't realize they've done it until the recipient acknowledges it and says, oh, I don't think this was meant for me. And also, people don't always report as well because they're scared of the repercussions of doing so. So this is a massive issue. And if you're in one of those highly regulated industries in particular, it can have a huge impact on your business. There's the immediate loss of revenue if you lose a client because of this, or multiple clients. There's the regulatory fines, legal action. There's the time and resources it takes to remediate these issues and training teams. And the most damaging thing is the impact, or potential impact, to your reputation and brand as well, of course. So, in terms of how Tessian solves this challenge, as I mentioned, we've done that learning process to know what's normal behavior. So, to determine whether we think an email is being directed to the right person, the recipient is the correct one that's intended, we analyze various parameters to come to that decision. We use a decision tree algorithm there to make that final call. And the first thing we look at is the recipient itself. We're considering, has this sender, in this case Sandra Kim, the accounting manager, has she emailed Julia Smith at one bank before? Has she done so recently? Because of course there are changes over time. What was normal 6 months ago when they were working on one project together might not be normal now. And we also consider the content itself. We look at the subject line, we're looking for any metadata within the body of the email as well. Things like project identifiers, you can see here highlighted a Project Idaho. And we're considering, is it normal for Sandra to discuss Project Idaho with Julia? We also look at the salutation. We're making sure that firstly, that seems to match up with the recipient. And also, how does Sandra normally address Julia Smith at one bank? Is it with a "Hi Julia," or is it with a "Dear Mrs. Smith"? If it's the latter, that looks unusual. Why she suddenly changed that? And we also look at the attachment. We can scan that to look at the body, we look at the name, the type, the size, and so on. And again, we're making a decision. Is it normal for these two people to be corresponding, sharing this data in this file? So those are some of the indicators and data points we look at. And if you think there's been a mistake, this is where the kind of user awareness piece comes in, the education piece. Will provide a contextual warning which provides the exact reasoning for why we think this particular email might be misdirected. As you can see here, we're saying there's a similarly named contact within Sandra's network. This is Julia Smith at Tufin, as opposed to one bank. That has a stronger correlation to the keywords in the email. So that Project Idaho, would you still like to send it? And the sender can simply decline to send that email if we've correctly spotted that as a mistake. And again, the natural kind of reaction to seeing this, I think, from many people is, oh, is it going to be flagging all the time? This is not one of those solutions which is every time you send an email to a new person, it's asking you to check a box. And it's not saying, oh, this person's outside your lane, this is more intelligent. We're doing this based on all that data that we've gathered and the understanding of the wider organization and network there. And the second of the outbound modules, Enforcer, as I mentioned earlier, is used for preventing those non-compliant emails, emails that contain sensitive information that are sent to unauthorized accounts. And by unauthorized, I mean addresses they shouldn't be. It's not in the normal kind of working pattern of that employee. They're sending it to personal accounts so they can print or work from home, or they're sending it, or they're trying to steal the data, so they're sending it to a custom domain, or their spouse's address, for instance, try and take it away from the organization. So that's what we're detecting. This is the insider threat that we're preventing here. And as I mentioned, this could be more careless or negligent, or it could be more malicious in the case of employees trying to steal IP or confidential information. As I mentioned earlier, where Tessian differentiates is using machine learning to automatically prevent these issues. Like it's very difficult for traditional DLP solutions to prevent this issue using rules and policies. It's also time consuming to do that. It requires a lot of maintenance. kind of evaluation of those instances as well, and there will always be gaps. That's particularly for the accidental data loss. You can't really set up rules and policies and a structure to prevent that. It's just too hard to identify and too many variables. But again, it's the same applies to this exfiltration issue, because you could track all of the emails that are going to free mail domains, for instance, Gmails and Hotmails, but for many organizations there are very legitimate reasons to be corresponding with those accounts. And as I mentioned earlier, it's very easy just to create an account on GoDaddy, a custom domain, or it's very easy for somebody to email information to their spouse on a work address. Now that doesn't look like exfiltration, but it very well could be, so that's what we're concerned with. It's also very easy when you're trying to implement a solution for this to actually disrupt employees as well. If they're trying to email their personal accounts, they're sending flight tickets, restaurant bookings, whatever else it may be, doing weekend plans. We're not trying to interrupt users, we're doing things to stop the sensitive information leaving and only the sensitive information. So finding that right balance is really tricky. And this is another kind of what we would class as an iceberg issue, where IT leaders and businesses as a whole understand this is a risk, but they can't really quantify it. They've never had visibility of it, and they certainly haven't known how to solve the issue. And the trick with exfiltration I mentioned is it's very difficult to just track free mail domains, which is an approach that a lot of companies take, because in many cases it's useless doing that. It's easy to circumvent. And so Enforcer's solving two challenges. Firstly, we're identifying all of those unauthorized accounts, not just based on the way they look or whether they're free mail domains, but based on the way in which they're interacted with. We know what normal is, so we can spot anomalies. And then secondly, our algorithms are filtering out the non-sensitive stuff, not disrupting employees, and capturing that sensitive information. So in terms of the parameters we look at to detect whether an address is unauthorized, firstly we look at the reciprocity, and we're considering, is this email correspondence one way? Because often, of course, if I created an account on GoDaddy, I was trying to take all of the relevant Tessian information, all the partners I'm working with, all the contacts, that correspondence probably isn't going to be reciprocal. I'm probably not responding to acknowledge that email or ask questions or thank myself, for instance. We also look at the node analysis, because typically that address will just be associated to me. It's not like my colleagues on my team are also interacting with that address. And we look at name similarity. This isn't always foolproof, but it is often the case that these addresses will include at least part of somebody's name. And finally, and this is the most important one, what kind of messages are being sent? These messages don't often include lengthy explanations or many questions. In fact, most of the time, they're forwarded and the body is completely empty. So once we've done that analysis, the output we get is this list of unauthorized pairings, essentially. We match every employee with the unauthorized addresses that are associated with them. So you get a view of that. Typically we find employees can have 2 to 3 of these that are associated with them. Now this doesn't confirm any malicious behavior. It just shows the data, it just provides you an overview of the addresses that data could be exfiltrated to. But some employees have many more than that. And then, as I mentioned, we're filtering out the non-sensitive stuff, and we are picking up on the sensitive stuff. Commercial data, HR data, IP, other confidential information to that business, information that hasn't been shared externally before, for instance. And then when an employee hits send on an email, again, we're performing that spot check, we're analyzing various parameters, and we're considering, is this an unauthorized address? In this case, you can see, well, it includes part of Sandra's name, the body's empty, there's probably no reciprocity here, perhaps the account isn't connected with anyone else at the organization, so yeah, this looks like an unauthorized address. And does it contain sensitive information? There's a board pack here, there's some modeling information, so yeah, this looks like sensitive. And then you can take the appropriate response to that. You can configure Tessian, I should say, to take the appropriate response. So you could silently track these cases, just to get a view of the level of exfiltration at your organization. You can warn users, as you saw there, and this is again is contextual. We're warning this sender, Sandra, that it's against the company policy to send this kind of information to an unauthorized account. And most of the time, as I said, this isn't done maliciously. In most cases, it is just people, it's an oversight, people not realizing, people trying to take contacts with them so they can stay in touch with their old colleagues, for instance. But again, it's a breach of policy and risk to the organization. Or you can block these emails altogether. And you can apply different policies to different groups of users. So perhaps you want to track your executive team, you want to block anyone that's handed in their notice, or you have a good idea is leaving, and then you want to warn anyone else to provide that ongoing education. And in the dashboard, there are various ways to view the data if you get a lead of all of those riskiest users, and that feeds into that kind of visibility on human layer risk I was talking about. And over time, our customers see how exfiltration of the organization reduces as they introduce more education, or they introduce the warnings or the blocks, for instance. I'm just going to pause there in case there are any questions, because that's the last of the outbound modules. Before I discuss Defender, which is our product for inbound email security. But does anyone have any questions on the outbound side? No? Okay. Yeah.
How long would it take for the product to learn, companies, exchange and information?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is the benefit of looking back. We don't have a long learning cycle because we're ingesting that 12 months of information that's already there. So it takes, we say we can offer protection within a day. So after kind of 24 hours, we've done that learning. The algorithms have processed the data, we can start to add value from there.
So George, in terms of configuration of policies and setup of the system, how long does that take?
It's really simple because it's using machine learning, it's all automatic. There are policies you can deploy, and you might have seen on an earlier slide, we had constructor after those two outbound modules, and that's the policy engine within Tessian. We rebranded that recently as Architect and really upgraded it, and that really took us from solving those two particular use cases to a full email DLP replacement, because we now have a really intelligent policy engine which you can combine with the machine learning to say, if there's an anomaly for whatever reason, use this policy, or if the data is sensitive based on what we know, use this policy and so on. So companies can use that, because policies are very necessary in many cases, so you can use that for regulatory compliance or what have you. So, but not long, because for the most part, the things we're solving, it's done based on those algorithms, and it's done automatically. That's the beauty of it. You're not having to spend a long time setting up these policies and maintaining and reviewing them. Okay, yeah, so Defender. This is the inbound module. And Defender stops impersonation attacks or phishing attacks that bypass secure email gateways or Microsoft 365 or Google. So those platforms are using signature-based methods, as Joe referenced earlier, to catch known threats. They weren't designed to catch unknown threats. So Tessian uses a different approach. Rather than looking for malware or known URLs using threat intelligence, for instance, we're using behavioral intelligence in a similar context to what I've already discussed. And we're using that to detect signs of impersonation or compromise. So Tessian should be viewed as a layer of protection on top of a customer's existing defenses, whether that's a secure email gateway, whether it's 365 or Google. We're stopping the threats that they weren't designed to catch. And we don't mind which platform that is. We're stopping different challenges. We are seeing a gradual trend in the market, though, where increasingly customers are consolidating the 365. We want to be that layer of protection on top for stopping those inbound and outbound threats. And we're shaping our roadmap accordingly. I mentioned earlier that there's a kind of increased adoption and use of other communication channels, Teams being a predominant one, and we're expanding Tessian to cover those other use cases and applications at the beginning of next year. So those same threats of people making mistakes or breaking the rules or getting tricked apply also on Teams, SharePoint, whatever it may be. So we want to be our layer of protection on top of 365. And the type of attacks we're solving, these more advanced attacks, is where Tessian really adds value to organizations. Of course, the other platforms I mentioned are doing a really effective job at stopping those bulk phishing, bulk spam attacks. We're stopping the slightly more sophisticated ones like business email compromise or spear phishing, account takeovers, vendor impersonations, that type of thing. And these are the ones that really have a big impact, that last kind of 5 to 10%. And to do that, we're leveraging two sources of data. The first is a customer's email data. And I already mentioned this earlier, we're ingesting that historical data to learn and understand all the relationships within an email network, internally and emailing externally. So if there is an impersonation of some kind or a compromise of some kind, we can detect that. And additionally, we're leveraging our global threat network, which is an anonymized database of all of the known threats and malicious emails that Tessian has detected. And what we tend to see is that the same bad actors will target a given industry, many companies within that industry using similar techniques. So by leveraging this intelligence, we can prevent an attack for one of our customers that we've already seen in a peers network. And there are kind of 3 levels of data analysis that Tessian goes through to identify these attacks. The first is the data layer, whereby we're comparing a given email that's received against the data that we've already analyzed, that historical data. And we're considering things like, does this domain look like an impersonation of a domain that our customer already has a relationship with? And have we ever received emails from this IP address before? What salutation would we expect from this sender? Does this look consistent with that? And does this display name look consistent to the one we've seen for this particular sender in the past? We're also using natural language processing to perform a content X-ray. And here we're looking for signals of malicious intent, like words that would indicate urgency, for example, or a request for payment. If we've analyzed that data, as I showed on the previous slide, and there are a few anomalies there, and then we see malicious intent as well, that can really tip us off that something's going on. We can also identify more subtle techniques used by hackers. A popular one is for them to edit the subject line, for instance, to add RE to make it look like a reply to help build familiarity with that recipient, so we can spot that as well. And then finally is Tessian's behavioral analysis. And that's where that involves us analyzing the behavior of the particular recipient, and but also their colleagues, so their company as a whole, and Tessian's threat network, so our entire client base. And we're considering whether anybody has marked this email as malicious previously, and how other people have responded to the